Hey y'all, Sunny here, and honey, do I have a story for you today? So, picture this. You're literally the most powerful person in an entire country. You've got servants bringing you sweet tea. Well, maybe not sweet tea since this is Sweden we're talking about, but you get the idea. You've got more money than you know what to do with, and people are literally bowing down to you left and right. Sound pretty sweet, right? Before we get started, make sure you're subscribed because we're always exploring these incredible historical figures that your history teacher probably never told you about. So, picture this. It's the 1600s. Sweden is basically the powerhouse of Northern Europe, and they've got this little 6-year-old girl who just became queen. Not a princess waiting for her prince, an actual ruling queen. That's our girl Christina, and from day one, she was not your typical royal. Christina was born in 1626, and here's where it gets interesting right off the bat. When she was born, everyone thought she was a boy because, and I'm not making this up, she was apparently born extremely hairy and had what they called a harsh cry. The midwives were like, "It's a prince," and then had to backtrack real quick when they figured out she was actually a girl. Her father, King Gustavus Adolphus, was reportedly so surprised that he laughed and said she'd be clever because she had already fooled them all. Little did he know how right he was going to be. Now, her daddy was this legendary warrior king who died in battle when Christina was just 6 years old. Can you imagine? One day you're a little girl playing with toys, and the next day people are bowing to you and calling you Your Majesty. The Swedish parliament basically said, well, she's what we've got, and made her queen, with a whole bunch of regents to help run things until she was old enough. But here's the thing about Christina, she was not having any of the traditional princess nonsense from the very beginning. While other royal girls were learning embroidery and how to curtsy properly, Christina was out here demanding to learn Latin, Greek, and philosophy. She wanted to sword fight, she wanted to hunt, and she absolutely refused to wear dresses most of the time. The girl showed up to official ceremonies in men's clothing and nobody could really stop her because, hello, she was the queen. Her tutors were probably pulling their hair out because Christina had this insatiable curiosity about everything. She'd wake up at 4 in the morning to study. 4 a.m., y'all. I can barely wake up at 7 for work, and this girl was voluntarily getting up before dawn to read philosophy. She spoke 9 languages fluently, could debate theology with the best scholars in Europe, and had this massive library that was basically her pride and joy. But the really wild part? Christina was having serious doubts about this whole Protestant thing that Sweden was all about. Remember, this was right after the Reformation, and Sweden was proudly Lutheran, partly because Christina's grandfather had converted from Catholicism. But Christina was secretly reading Catholic texts and getting really intrigued by Catholic theology. In Protestant Sweden, as their queen, you can see where this is headed, right? The Swedish nobles kept pressuring her to get married because, they needed heirs and alliances and all that royal business. They kept parading eligible princes in front of her, and Christina was just not interested. Some historians think she might have been lesbian or just asexual. Others think she was so focused on intellectual pursuits that romance wasn't her thing. Either way, she kept telling everyone, thanks, but no thanks, to marriage, which was basically unheard of for a queen back then. Meanwhile, she's secretly meeting with Catholic missionaries and getting more and more convinced that Catholicism is the right path for her. Can you imagine keeping that secret? In a country where your own grandfather kicked out all the Catholics? The stress must have been unreal. By the time Christina was in her 20s, she'd basically turned the Swedish court into this incredible center of learning. She brought in scholars, artists, and philosophers from all over Europe. She was corresponding with René Descartes. Yes, that Descartes, the "I think therefore I am" guy, and actually convinced him to come to Sweden to be her personal tutor. Unfortunately, Poor Descartes couldn't handle the Swedish winter and died of pneumonia, which Christina felt terrible about for the rest of her life. But the pressure to marry and produce heirs was getting intense, and Christina was getting more and more miserable trying to be this Protestant queen when her heart was pulling her toward Catholicism. She started having what we'd probably call anxiety attacks today. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and was just generally falling apart under the pressure. And then, in what might be the most dramatic royal decision ever made, Christina decided she was done. In 1654, at just 28 years old, she shocked all of Europe by announcing that she was abdicating the throne. Not retiring when she got old, not stepping down because of illness. She just straight up quit being queen because it wasn't making her happy. The abdication ceremony was absolutely wild. Christina walks into the Great Hall wearing her full royal regalia, crown, scepter, the works. One by one, she removes each piece of royal jewelry and hands it over to her cousin Charles, who is going to be the new king. She takes off the crown herself, nobody else gets to do it, and places it on a table. Then she gives this speech about how she's served Sweden faithfully but needs to follow her own path. There wasn't a dry eye in the house, and honestly, I'm getting emotional just thinking about it. But here's where it gets even crazier. She wasn't done with the dramatic gestures. After abdicating, Christina had to get out of Sweden because she wanted to convert to Catholicism, and doing that in Sweden would have been problematic. So she disguised herself as a man, again with the men's clothing, and traveled through Europe under a fake name to get to Rome. When she finally made it to Rome, the Pope himself welcomed her, and she had this incredibly elaborate conversion ceremony. We're talking processions through the streets, ceremonies at St. Peter's Basilica, the whole 9 yards. The Catholic Church was absolutely thrilled because having a former Protestant queen convert was like the ultimate PR win for them. Now, here's where I need to clear something up because some were calling her a nun, but technically Christina never actually became a nun in the traditional sense. She converted to Catholicism and lived a very religious life, but she didn't take formal vows or join a convent. She lived more like a really devout laywoman, spending her time studying theology, supporting the arts, and doing charitable work. Christina spent the rest of her life in Rome, and y'all, she did not go quietly into retirement. She kept causing scandals left and right. She had this massive palazzo where she held salons with artists and intellectuals. She got involved in papal politics. She even tried to become Queen of Naples at one point, because apparently once you've been royalty, it's hard to completely give it up. She also had some seriously questionable moments. There was this incident where she had one of her servants executed because she suspected him of betraying her secrets, which was pretty shocking even by 17th century standards. It seems like Christina had this all-or-nothing personality. When she did something, she went all the way with it, whether that was being queen, converting to Catholicism, or dealing with people who crossed her. But despite all the drama, Christina never seemed to regret her decision to give up the throne. She lived in Rome for over 30 years, and by all accounts, she was much happier there than she ever was as Queen of Sweden. She got to study what she wanted, worship how she wanted, and live on her own terms without a whole country watching her every move. Christina died in 1689 at the age of 62, and here's the ultimate honor. She's buried in St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City. There are only 3 women buried there, and one of them is our girl Christina. Not bad for someone who started life fooling everyone about her gender and ended it by completely rewriting the rules of what a queen could do. I think her story shows us that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from something that looks perfect on paper, but makes you miserable in reality. Christina had literally everything: power, wealth, status, but none of it mattered because it wasn't authentic to who she really was. She chose personal fulfillment over duty, faith over politics, and authenticity over expectations. In a time when women, especially royal women, had basically no choice in how they lived their lives, Christina looked at all the rules and said, "Yeah, I'm gonna make my own rules. thanks. She could be ruthless, dramatic, and sometimes downright cruel. But she was also brilliant, brave, and completely unwilling to live a lie just because it was easier or more expected. I think there's something really inspiring about someone who was willing to give up a literal crown because staying true to herself was more important than keeping everyone else happy. In our world of social media pressure and constant comparison, maybe we could all learn something from Christina's example of choosing authenticity over approval. Her story also shows us how complicated religious conversion could be in that era. This wasn't just a personal spiritual decision. It was political, it was dangerous, and it had consequences that rippled across Europe. But Christina decided her relationship with God was more important than her relationship with her country's religious expectations. And honestly, the fact that she pulled off one of the most dramatic career changes in history and lived to tell the tale is pretty incredible. She went from being one of the most powerful people in Europe to being essentially a religious scholar and art patron, and she seemed to find way more peace in that second life than she ever had in the first. Christina of Sweden proves that it's never too late to completely reinvent yourself, even if it means walking away from everything everyone expects you to be. She's like the ultimate example of someone who chose personal happiness over public approval, and honestly, we could all probably use a little bit of that energy in our own lives. So that's the incredible story of Christina of Sweden, the queen who said thanks, but no thanks to royal life and chose God over a crown. What do you think? Was she brave or crazy? Could you imagine giving up that kind of power for your beliefs? Alright, y'all, if you enjoyed this absolutely wild ride through history, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe for more crazy historical stories, and drop a comment below. I love hearing from y'all.